You'll be hearing from Freedom House's new president in a minute. And I want to thank Facebook for its very generous support. I know it's always hazardous to do this, but I have a list of people who've really put in a lot of effort, and I just wanted to acknowledge them at this time. From the Africa team at NED, Katie Campo, Pierre Tanchow, and Sarah Levital. From SEMA, Valerie Popper-Sinden, Rosemary Damore, and Paul Rothman. From the World Movement, Ryota Jonen and Mariam Isfahani. From Freedom House, Kellen McClure and Vukasin Petrovic. And from the Open Society Foundations, Kazito Bienkin and Sarah Prey. Thanks to all of you for all the hard work you did to put this together. Let's give them all a big round of applause. I've known Mark Lagon since he was a young whippersnapper on Capitol Hill quite a few years ago. As I recall, Mark was working for Congressman Christopher Cox at the time, who later was a very active NED board member. Since that time, Mark has done many, many things. He's got involved in the trafficking issue in various capacities at the State Department, and actually headed an organization that works on the issue. He worked on human rights at the Council on Foreign Relations, and his most recent position, I want to make sure I get this right, I wrote it down, is Chair for Global Politics and Security at Georgetown School of Foreign Service. Since January, Mark has been the president of Freedom House. I'm delighted that he is the president of Freedom House. It's a longtime partner of NED, a great organization, and so at this time I'd like to present to you Mark Lagon.
Thank you, David. You're as good a friend as you are a friend of freedom and democracy around the world. I appreciate it. Let me start by thanking the National Endowment for Democracy, the World Movement for Democracy, and the Center for International Media Assistance for hosting this event. I think it was well conceived, and I'm delighted it came off. I want to thank the participants part in the discussions today, especially for their important and courageous work across Africa about which they were speaking. Sometimes we forget that the reason we can have informed conversations in Washington about what's happening like Gambia and Sudan is because people like you are risking your safety and your lives to report on the news on the ground. So thank you for that crucial work. So we all know the timing of this event is no coincidence. World Press Freedom Day is quickly approaching, and in anticipation of that important day, next week Freedom House is releasing its annual Freedom of the Press report. It's going to be celebrating its 25th anniversary this year, and it measures media freedom around the world and touches on many of the same issues that were discussed today. I'm not going to get into the findings. You need to tune in next week to our report to find out. I don't think you'll be surprised to hear that the overall picture is grim. The direction things are going on media freedom are the wrong direction. In sub-Saharan Africa, in particular, we found that the levels of press freedom declined in both autocracies and in democracies alike. In both conflict zones, like South Sudan, and in typically good governance performers like Botswana. In these countries, reporters continue to face a number of threats daily. Political elites and non-state actors still use tried and true tactics of physical threats and violence to silence alternative voices. Perhaps more alarming, however, is the rise of restrictive legislation passed with the express purpose of punishing anyone who dares to expose malfeasance and abuse of power, and who instead pushes for accountability. As we are all aware, this week marks the 1-year anniversary of the arrest of the Zone 9 bloggers and journalists in Ethiopia, a group that now faces terror for simply reporting on the issues of the day to everyday Ethiopians. The case of Zone 9 is a stark example of a new authoritarian strategy to silence dissent. Rule by law rather than rule of law. While all this news is somewhat grim, we ought not to get caught up in looking at the problems affecting freedom of expression and press freedom to the detriment of understanding why these rights are so vital and important. We often think of freedom of expression as an inherent right, enshrined in Article 19 of the Universal Declaration on Human Rights. It's important. But freedom of expression, specifically a free and vibrant press, serves a very practical purpose, as well as our deeply held values. It allows for the flow of information, for the spread of ideas, for debate. Vigorous debate of ideas is what is the requisite of any democracy functioning. It's how people determine their needs, their preferences, how democratic governments shape their policies. That type of debate is only possible in countries where information and ideas are accessible to everyone, which is itself only possible to free and independent press, the focus of today's discussion. A free press also serves that crucial function in a democracy of promoting accountability. This is especially important in countries across Africa where leaders, both authoritarian leaders and democratic ones, have tried to limit the accountability they have to their citizens. And there's a growing sense of impunity among the perpetrators of abuse and violence, which brings me to the introduction of Maina Kiai and his incredible film, Kenya, Guidebook to Impunity. It's a special pleasure to introduce this film and be here with Maina Kiai. When I got named as president of Freedom House, he was the awardee at the annual dinner of Freedom House. So I have special affection for him, but it's his work that is so important. His fearless leadership in advocating for constitutional reform, for fighting corruption, and educating Kenyans on their basic civil and human rights is remarkable. But he plays a global and a multilateral role as the UN Special Rappetour for Freedom of Assembly and Association, and as a renowned civil society activist, Maina has been instrumental in advancing and defending the rights that allow citizens to hold their leaders accountable. He starts this movie by saying one of the most important tools we, human rights defenders, one of the most important tools we have is our refusal to be intimidated and our willingness to push back. As we will see, there were serious questions about the legitimacy of Kenya's 2013 elections. But unlike other flawed elections in Africa and beyond, civil society was there to document and challenge the blatant electoral manipulation that took place. Maina and his team, just like the journalists and activists in this room and involved in this conference today, played a critical role in holding Kenya's political elite accountable and pushing back against the impunity that permeated Kenya's political culture. And I think ultimately this is the same role I hope we all will play in our small ways, pushing back against those who feel they're above the law and they don't feel obligated to respect the basic guarantees of all people in international law. So now we move to this film. It's a rich film, and after that we'll have a discussion with Maina. The conversation will continue in a more convivial form thereafter, with drinks and splendid food at a reception honoring today's participants. So thank you, and now to the film.
As an activist, one of the most important tools we have is refusal to be intimidated, is rejecting intimidation and fighting back and saying, no, intimidation you will not succeed with me. The problem we have had in Kenya and in many countries across the world when you have authoritarian regimes is that people fear. And part of the things for me, as I see, is to make sure I show to myself and to other people around, I don't have fear. We can't have fear. Fear allows people who are in positions of authority to trample over us. I see my role as trying to catalyze Kenyans to organize themselves to stand up to this. Impunity is a process in which people who are in power especially can do things that are wrong, do things that are absolutely illegal, but they get away with it simply because they're powerful. So, in March 2013, Kenya held a presidential election, the first under the new constitution. One of the candidates, Uhuru Kenyatta, and his running mate, William Ruto, had been separately and individually charged by the International Criminal Court at The Hague. That was despite the fact that the new constitution that came into place in 2010 had very clear provisions about qualities of leadership that were necessary for people to be able to become leaders in the country. These charges related to the violence and the crisis that Kenya had in the previous election of 2007.
At the close of 2007, the people of Kenya suffered through one of the most violent episodes in Kenya's history. During that period, more than 1,000 people had their lives taken from them. Over 3,000 people were brutally maimed, while others were sexually violated. Hundreds of thousands of families were forced to flee their home in panic. The crimes that were inflicted on the people of Kenya during that period deeply shocked the conscience of humanity. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my mandate as the prosecutor of the International Criminal Court to investigate and prosecute those who I believe to be most responsible for those crimes, irrespective of their status.
Mimi pamoja na wenzangu, kuna waliobakwa, kuna waliochinjwa, kuna waliokatakatwa, wamama wakabeba sehemu zao za mwili za bwana zao. Mambo ikafanyika, watoto walipotea, watoto walikuwa wanajazwa kwa malori, wanamwagwa.
Vitu zetu zilipotea, naye pia sisi pia tukarepiwa. Mimi nilirepiwa, vitu zangu pia zilichukuliwa, nikakuja na mkono tupu.
Wakanikuta kwa njia, vijana walikuwa 6 na kila mtu alikuwa na mshale. Nikawakataza, nikawaambia tafadhali msinipige mshale. Wakasikia vile niliwaambia, wakarudisha mshale, wakatoa vishu ilikuwa kwa malongi yao. Halafu ndio wakaanza kunikata nikifanya namna hii, nikifanya namna hii, nikifanya namna hii, wakakata.
Tukaona wameanza kuchoma manyumba na pia sisi tukafikiwa na tukawa tumeadhirika. Watu wakaanza kuuawa, manyumba ikaanza kuchomwa.
When you go out to different parts of the country, victims and survivors still exist and the anger has not gone. Partly because the numbers were so large. Even calling them numbers, it's dehumanized them. When the election process started, we had 2 leading candidates already indicted and charged with crimes against humanity. And it was almost inevitably clear that one of the reasons why they were so determined to be candidates was because they wanted to be able to marginalize and push back these charges. So we come now to the first election under the new constitution in 2013, and there's very, very high expectations. Very soon after the voting process starts, we get information that the EVIDs, the machines that identify us from our thumbprints, were not working in most parts of the country. My papers. Left. Umekata?
Let us try again. Try to wipe it. Maybe it is moist. A little moist.
Yeah, maybe it's sweating. You know, this is a big moment.
Okay, try again.
So what do we do now?
I just type in your details and then
I have registered. I even have that card they give you.
let me just type it.
Yeah, let's go. Just test that. See if the system is working.
Yeah, you are there. Verified your details.
But it's not work on the. Why didn't it not work?
Maina Kiai.
It's a seminal moment, and it's a moment also of accountability. And it's an issue of human rights primarily as well, because there's a right to vote that we have.
I think this person who was registering people at New Kitusu made a lot of mistakes.
Our registration center says Lower Kabete, but the polling station says Karasila Primary.
Right.
So we are here. We've checked with the machine outside, it's not there. We were told to come and check with the manual register, but it's not there. So she's asked us to go to Lower Kabete.
The main issues that arose on the voting day was firstly for me the fact that the machines weren't working, and that the electronic safeguards we were expecting to give us confidence that this election is different from the last one didn't work. I think the other thing that was also very, very significant was the long lines and the long delays. I think the other bit of it is people coming to vote and they don't see their names. They can't find their names on the register that's supposed to be there.
This is the SMS I received confirming I have registered. I am now being told by the Deputy Returning Officer that I cannot vote because my details do not appear in their system.
Hello madam, habari za leo?
Nzuri.
Iko nini?
Nilikuja huku kitu 12. Tangu saa hizo nimepanga line, nimefika hapo mbele za 10. Jina yangu haipatikani, nimetembea kwa tents zote, wananiambia kuna jina. Mpaka saa hii mtoto amechoka, ameanza kulala.
Oh, ni jina gani unatumia?
Naomi.
Naomi ni N?
Naomi ni N.
Utaulize hapo mzee. How are you, sir? How is everything? You're the presiding officer? How are you? Okay, good. My name is Maina Kiai. Yeah, and I'm doing an observation. And I'm just very distressed.
Yeah.
There's no light.
There's no light because we are not supplied with the generator.
Oh, pressure. How many pressure lamps are you given?
Pressure lamps we have. I think they have 2. What's happening?
Where are the tents?
Tents we had
for here.
Very scarce.
Why? Why are they not supplying you?
We don't know. We don't know because they didn't supply.
Because now, you see, you can't even see the color of the lid. So some of those small technical things that began to raise questions about how prepared the IEBC was, and if it's not prepared, how willfully unprepared was it? The mechanical process of voting has actually been quite good in Kenya over the years. That's not where the problem arises in Kenya. It's always before and then after. Bomas, you really expected and wanted transparent process, especially at the tally, because Kenya's problems of elections always happen at the tally. So that's the place where you expect as much openness as possible.
The results are continuing to stream in, to come in, though slowly now.
So we get into bomas and you find all of a sudden, instead of transparency, you're finding policemen. Instead of getting information, you're finding closed off. How are you, sir? Now we're having problems, it seems, getting the camera in. Yeah? Why?
One, because according to communication protocol, we were told somebody must be cleared by our manager communication.
He's cleared. He's got a badge. He has a badge to come in here. Oh gosh. We are at the tallying center, and as you can see, we have been put up at the top, even though we are domestic observers who should be watching the process as it happens on the ground. The tallying center receives the hard copy forms, and then they're checked and they're entered into a system so that you can have a tallying now at the national level.
As of 9:30 last night, we experienced a network slowdown, but that has been fixed, and the IEBC is confident that there will be successful completion of the counting and the transmission of the results as we see.
At some point during the process, the IEBC basically kicked out the agents of the presidential candidates out of the room and said they're costing them time, they're checking too much. In a sense, IEBC decided to sacrifice accuracy for speed. That by itself is a point of tension, because the agents are there to make sure that what is being announced, what's coming out, at least reflects what they should be getting from their own people on the ground.
Of the results that have just been announced, our people had not agreed and they had not signed. And they had already agreed in the morning that nothing will be announced before all the agents actually check and agree and sign.
As the results are coming in, it becomes clear that, again, the electronic safeguards are supposed to help us are not working for us anymore.
The electronic vote transmission system had challenges, rendering some services on the main server non-functional. The Commission reverted to physical official results, which are final and authenticated by the documentation from the returning officers.
The return to manual was a signal that this is clear where it's going, because manual is the easiest system to manipulate. You will then tell the returning officers to come to Nairobi and bring your figures. No one now knows what the returning officers are announcing in the ground there and what they're announcing in Nairobi.
I was informed when I was at Nyambaria that some force were added and some agents have stolen the evidence.
Nicholas Kipto Arab Korean slabs, 20,500. This is Kitur Kemoy. This is Nicholas Salat.
We can't announce the issues. We can't announce. We have issues.
The Coalition of Reforms and Democracy held a news conference this morning questioning the integrity of the tallying and saying some results had been doctored. And now you've said you're the returning officer of the presidential results. Have they written to you? Have they given you an official complaint?
No. Thank you.
Have they been doctored, the results?
Yes.
Have they been doctored?
No, of course not. This fact that we have now abandoned the electronic vote transmission does not in any way mean that the integrity of the results which are being announced are compromised.
Registered voters, 56,999.
This form, this
are agents of candidates.
With grievances.
With the issues that they are raising. First of all, Kwanzaa, I think everybody is entitled, every Kenyan is entitled to raise an issue, but not everybody can come here. These are agents of candidates. They are raising issues. Listen to them.
IEBC still being given room. Please rectify. We are raising this. Please rectify the mistakes. Please don't take us there.
We will be announcing the results as soon as we finish processing. So we'd like to ask for your indulgence at this particular point in time. You will continue to be entertained by the choir.
By the last day, when now IEBC has to make an announcement to tell us that this is the election. Instead, we're hearing all these choirs coming on, singing songs, almost urging us to be patriotic and accept.
This was the most complex election that this country has had, and comparatively, the most complex perhaps that Africa has ever seen.
I don't buy that Kenya is more complex than other countries. Every country has complexities. Every election is complicated.
Total number of votes cast was 12,330,028. Since Uhuru Kenyatta has received 6,173,433, he has received more than 50.07%. He has also received more than 25% in at least 32 counties. I therefore declare Uhuru Kenyatta the duly elected President of the Republic of Kenya.
So immediately the election results are declared. Some people are jubilant and others are feeling bad because they're not declared the winner.
It is clear that the constitutionally sanctioned process of electing a new set of leaders to take us to the next level has been thwarted by another tainted election. We will therefore shortly move to court to challenge the outcome that the IEBC announced.
Civil society came together and began putting together a petition because the law allows us to challenge the declaration of the election.
We had 7 days to prepare the petition. We had a small group of volunteers in civil society. And what we did was basically download the forms that the IEBC had put on its website and tally them up.
Okay. Okay, thanks. That's fine.
I'm done. I'm ready to go.
Well, the first thing that was problematic was that the server that was being used to receive the results from the electronic results transmission system was being kept in a room that was accessible and shared by the Election Commission, the IEBC, and by the Kenyatta-Ruto Alliance. The second problem was that a lot of evidence from experts that said there was no way that server could have crashed. The server had been designed with the sole purpose of being able to receive a huge number of results from all those thousands of polling stations across the country. And in addition to that, we were concerned because the total number of registered voters kept changing. So it wasn't just that there was a provisional register in December and then a final one in February. No, in fact, there was another one that was circulating on election day that political parties had been given. And then there was a different number when the IEBC announced the final result.
Our position was very, very clear. It was not about the result, it was about the process. It is the process that determines results. So if you have a good process, then the result will be fine, whichever way it goes. So you go through the different provisions within the Constitution and ask yourself, have these been met? And if not, we showed how they had not been met. But we also had another tool, which is we had video clips. Now, Information's work is basically out in the countryside using the camera in as many ways as we can. The teams from Information had been around the polling stations, the tallying stations, and we were really feeling good that this would be the first time perhaps that video clips would be used in court and hopefully then show without a shadow of a doubt that the election had been irredeemably messed up.
Has already interfered with the process.
There is a safety valve that had been built in the institution, which is the Supreme Court. Again, at that point, very respected, at that point, very highly regarded, and almost every Kenyan feeling that the Supreme Court, if something goes wrong, we can always go to the Supreme Court, it will rectify.
This pre-trial conference begins a week of the hearing for the three petitions filed.
The Supreme Court's process starts quite well. They come in, there's a lot of respect, there's a lot of hope, there's a lot of uncertainty, as it should be.
My Lord, it is my humble submission that when you're exercising your jurisdiction in a presidential petition, it is not in the interest of the contestants. It is in the interest of the Republic of Kenya, the citizens of this country. Article 81 of the Constitution.
Our argument was that the presidential election was so bad that it should be redone. It's a difficult argument to make because you're basically saying that the 50 billion plus shillings that's been spent has been wasted. Very early in the process of the court, there's a decision to consolidate the cases together to make it one. So there's the case by opposition on the results and the case on civil society on the process. However, what we saw with the consolidation is that then the focus became only on the opposition case, about the results, the figures and numbers, rather than the process.
Senior Counsel Oraro.
At the beginning of the case, the opposition presented additional evidence that would have helped their case.
And when we look at these documents, we find that by small tallies, there were additions of votes for one candidate, deduction for another candidate, which were in Form 34, but not reflected in Form 36 and not in the results. And when you take totality of that manipulation, you end up with a situation where the results are well below what was reflected to the public.
The court decided to throw out that evidence, not because they looked at it, but on the basis of procedure. Even though the Constitution is very clear about always putting substance over procedure in documenting or dealing with evidence. Understanding why the servers crashed was a crucial point within the whole process of the election, because it was when the servers crashed that the election stopped being electronic. The safeguards that had been built through the electronic system and the servers were no longer existing, and we're back to 2007, manual election.
My Lord, there are 6 servers which they used at the headquarters. All we are asking for are the electronic logs.
The
IBC opposes the application. For you to give them the information, that is the logs and the MAC addresses and the IP addresses, you need to give them the equipment as well to be able to undertake. So essentially they are asking you to audit the entire registration process.
All that was being asked for was the logs of the server, which is simply the detailed information of the activity of the server from at any given time.
It is my humble submission that the Independent Electoral Boundaries Commission are obliged under the Constitution to be accountable. That means responsible and answerable. Those logs that the petitioner is requesting for will go to show why there was that failure.
Justice system, it's not an inquisitorial. The court really has no role to play in this matter. This application is really an abuse of court process. Nobody, including, I think, the petitioner, really knows the real purpose of this. And my lord, it ought to be dismissed.
Why were they so afraid of us as a country, knowing why this electronic safeguard collapsed?
How are we supposed to verify the fact that there was a failure of an instrument if we are not able to dig out the electronic log and know exactly what the machine said?
Just to help me and my colleagues to appreciate the gist of that application, what specific allegation in the petition do you hope to prove?
My lord, there is a specific pleading that the system as set up was set up to fail.
There shall be a register. 1.
One of the key recommendations from following the crisis in 2008 was the register.
IEBC had an obligation to observe the Constitution and the law. My lord, you've been told about a special register. You've been told about the Green Book. My lords, I will challenge the IEBC to look at our Elections Act, to look at our Constitution, and find me a Green Book.
What constitutes the principal register of voters would be the group of about 14 million odd whose BVR was captured at the registration process.
Are you suggesting that the principal register of voters actually is more than one register? It's not one document, but several, but called principal?
Yes, it's one and the same, my lord.
We discovered in arguing for the register that actually it turned out that there was not just one register, but a number of registers. And also it's not even a register with an opening date and a closing date. Instead, we have a data system where names can come in, can go out, can be changed. And so the whole integrity of registration and the reason for registration then disappears.
There shall be a scrutiny of all Forms 36.
There was excitement when the judges ordered for scrutiny of all Form 36 and 34. The scrutiny was held in the Kenyatta International Conference Center, about 200 meters away from the Supreme Court. We had our observers and monitors in that room like every other party to the petition.
During the retallying, we expected for the judicial staff to see everything we had been seeing for those days. All the errors on the forms, all the places where things didn't add up, all the places where there were no forms, you know, all those things. And they were noted.
But then they started coming back to us to tell us they were uneasy, they're having difficulties, there's some bit of bullying. So that's when I decided to try and go in so we could see if we could record that process. And when we got there, there's a lot of tension and nervousness going on in there. Now we know that the IEBC had more people than anybody else in that room. But they seem to have more access, even though they're also a party to the case, to the judges and to the whole process. We're not doing the history.
No.
Why? By trying to go into that scrutiny room, I believe I achieved... No, just leave, please. You're allowing cameras into the courtroom. That scrutiny room is a part of the courtroom.
All they did was look again at the forms from those polling stations and just sort of very closely scrutinize them and do a recount. But even that showed there were between 16 and 18 stations that showed over 100% turnout. In some cases, the turnout was over 200%. In some cases, the turnout was over 200% for those polling stations. None of that came out in the final report to the judges.
Know that the report given to the judges by the judicial officials was not what transpired in that room. And maybe that is what they wanted to hide.
Last night, Mr. Kiai went to the tallying center at KCC with a cameraman, and it's reported that you gave the security a hard time there.
What I was doing there is consistent with what I'm doing here. We are filming these proceedings as part of a film on the constitutionalism of this country. That's an extension of the court. The filming was not done inside, outside, but I think the point we're making is that this is a whole process which needs to be taken and recorded for the sake of this country. The civil society petition included video evidence that we thought would turn the tide in this case.
We are going to show a video.
One of the clips that was shown in the court showed the announcement of the presidential elections at the local county level, on the ground as it were, and then the announcement of the results at the national tallying level. And what it showed was a difference.
I'll invite this court to look at the results announced by the IEBC for Bomet County, and at its own time, look at
the bulk of the material is not in the court, it's not orally, it's in the petitions. And you have a legitimate expectation the judges will burn the midnight oil and read them. So when the submissions start and people are arguing, they know exactly where they're coming from.
You've seen the original form being stuck on the wall, being displayed as the law requires, is different. The results you have are not legitimate.
She cannot disprove that that video was stage managed or recorded in River Road. I don't know what it was.
One of the lawyers then says that this looks like it could have come from anywhere. But had he read the petition of civil society, he would have found all the evidence to show who filmed it, how it was filmed, and that was accepted by the court.
I think it is good, especially for a young court like this, which is crawling, I think, if I may put it, in terms of, age. I think it is good for it to show judicial restraint. You will find opportunities later in life where you can express yourself more.
As the case progressed, we started seeing a difference in attitude from the establishment lawyers. They became haughty, they became arrogant, they became patronizing, not just to the lawyers of the opposition and civil society, but even to the judges of the Supreme Court. And they would demean them. And the judges of the Supreme Court would just stand by and laugh like it's a big joke. In fact, you got a sense as the case progressed towards the end of it that actually the people in control of that case was the establishment lawyers, not the judges.
The political contest has been viewed by peer groups as being fair and credible. Observer status, they had people throughout the country who looked at all the electoral processes. There was nothing massively wrong with the elections.
There was nervousness as we waited the decision to be announced. And I think for me, the crucial part was really, will they or not? Because if you look through history, overturning an election result doesn't happen easily. It doesn't happen easily.
After extensive deliberations, we are happy to announce the Supreme Court has reached a unanimous decision.
The moment the Chief Justice announced that we have reached a unanimous decision, I knew it was finished. Just the logic of it meant that unanimous can only mean the lowest common denominator.
It is the decision of the court that the said elections were indeed conducted in compliance with the Constitution and the law. It is the decision of the court that the third and fourth respondents were validly elected. The detailed judgment containing reasons for decision of the court will be issued within 2 weeks from today, as Kenya.
My thought after the decision was given was, my goodness, the institution we thought was credible has failed us. The judgment was very divisive. Many of us were just numb. The safety valve of the Supreme Court worked in that instance, but it destroyed the credibility of the court and removed the Supreme Court as a future safety valve for this country. So as soon as the Supreme Court made its decision public on that Saturday, of course there was going to be reactions. There were protests in Kisumu, which is the stronghold of the opposition leader. But the press basically ignored the entire protest. There was an attempt by the media and by the state to give the narrative that everybody called accept and move on. But when it came to civil society, then the regime and its people began calling them evil society. And evil society in this context means people who are not accepting the basic narrative.
You've been told many of the reasons why we went to court. What motivated us was not any particular interest in whether this candidate or the other should have won, but in the process, because we believe that it's critical that our processes and our institutions work as they are supposed to do, because without this, we have no recourse other than the sort of situation we saw in 2008.
It's so crucial for us across the world to take the issue of elections very, very seriously. We've got to say that we cannot accept, the same way we don't accept military coups, we must not accept civilian coups. There was quite a lot of fear, not just within civil society, but in the country. Once Kenyatta and Ruto became president and deputy president respectively, they very quickly and very successfully turned their personal challenges into something about Kenya. One of the most interesting things during the campaign is Kenyatta being asked in a debate about the ICC and whether he would be able, if he became a head of state, to continue running the country and handling ICC. And his response was that, no, this is a personal challenge. I will deal with it personally as I go on dealing with the affairs of state. Literally 3 months after he became president, it changed. It's no longer personal, it's now a national issue. So they take a number of very quick steps. First of all is galvanizing Africa and Union leaders, not the people, to help them beat these charges. And you start seeing a flurry of activities at the African Union in Addis Ababa, which are concentrating on ICC. And essentially, African leaders pushing ICC to say, please stop these cases because these are against heads of state. The problem of putting some people above the law is that you then inculcate a culture of impunity. As long as I'm president, I can do whatever I want, nothing will ever happen. I can steal as much money as I want, nothing will ever happen. I can kill as many people as I want, nothing will ever happen. And of course, once the president has that sense, it trickles very quickly to people in authority. Because, if the president can do it, why can't I do it? Now, the British had told us that there will be minimal contact as long as the case was continuing. But as soon as the Supreme Court made its decision, you find the British ignoring what they'd said about minimal contact. In fact, Kenyatta's one of his first international trips was to London. So here you find a country that had pushed democracy, had pushed human rights, had pushed accountability as part of the strategic interest, pulling back on that and saying, actually, that's not so important anymore. Commercial interests are important, Somalia is important, security is important. They're way more important than democracy and accountability. Thank you very much. Kenya has just had another election that was flawed, particularly in the failure, the spectacular collapse, you could call it, of the systems there, largely funded by donors. How should donors hold the government of Kenya or the election body accountable for this kind of things?
You pay and put in electoral systems and expertise, but that doesn't give you a right to replace the sovereignty of the country. It's still Kenya's election. And so I'm sure on the donor side, huge frustration that this investment has not worked. I suppose if I was to criticize the donors, it's, why are you so surprised? I mean, good election practice starts with everybody being committed to an honest outcome. The technology of observing votes and doing sort of secondary vote counts and checks is always that. It's a technology that can aid people with an honest ambition for a fair result. Having reached out to President Kenyatta in a way that they promised they wouldn't before the election, you know, are they going to use that re-engagement with him to press for him to genuinely subject himself to the full authority of the Hague Court? Are they going to press for no witness tampering or intimidation or other efforts to abort the trial? Are they going to press to make sure that the opposition in Kenya and civil society organizations are properly protected? If indeed, though, it reflects no more than a pulling up of a white flag, okay, we was wrong, we accept the new status quo and there's no more talking about the past, then that would be a terrible moral failure.
If you read the reports of many of the observers, they document list after list of complete irregularity. Then you read the conclusion, it says it's okay. It is basically telling us as Africans, please, less than anybody else. No, he wanted to specifically reflect the will of the people.
Elections that he was seen by. What we found was that many of the things that were put in place to protect the electoral process failed. I think overall the domestic observers found that the kits failed in the majority of polling stations at some point during the day. There was also a major failure in the way that results were transmitted. And in that sense, I think it may even be a worse election from the procedural point of view than 2007, because more things failed. So in a sense, the peaceful election is obscuring the critical attitudes towards actually what happened. And one of the things that I think we need to realize is that if we have an election that bad again, we may not be so lucky.
Yet almost all the observers have said this election was acceptable, free and fair, the terms that are used. Why do you think they're doing that?
I think many of the observers have a very difficult position. Look, the observers are kind of undermined in their ability to say something particularly critical by capacity. I mean, these are often very small teams that go to countries for a very short period of time. The second is really a political control. In many cases, these aren't really independent. They have findings that are going to be acceptable to the countries or the organizations behind the election observation team. They also don't want to go against what they see as being the domestic process. I think once the Supreme Court in Kenya had come out and validated the result, many of the observers felt it would be very difficult for them then to criticize the process because it would be going against the Supreme Court, which they felt, at least in this election, was a reasonably independent body led by a reasonably independent figure.
So given that context, and what's the use of having observers if all they're going to do is endorse a political line from headquarters or from a country? What's the use of having international observers?
Well, I think you can make a great use of observers if what the observers do is to make it so that people in the country are less willing to use election rigging. But you're also right that there's a real danger of having monitors give a false sense of legitimacy and security to election results that they don't really merit.
I think the Americans eventually came to terms with the fact of Kenyatta being president. That came, of course, after the attack on Westgate. number of series of attacks of terrorism. Terror attacks on Kenya after the elections have had the consequence of reasserting Kenya into the international scene as now a partner as opposed to being a pariah. The response by the Kenyan regime on the terror attacks have also had the consequence of dividing us further. So there's been more division, there's been more repression as well, because the inclination by the regime to accumulate more and more powers. Post-election, Kenyatta's strategy and Kenyatta's priority at the international level was to finish the cases against him. The case that was put forward by the prosecution of the International Criminal Court was not weak. It's a strong case. What they needed was verification. They made some mistakes, clearly, which is that they didn't get all the evidence in time. And it seems to me, as an observer of the court, that they were collecting the evidence in stages. Ultimately, when you move that slow, then you're giving room to people who are accused to damage the evidence.
Yes.
What we saw is a lot of people who would be first-hand witnesses dying, killed, disappearing.
The defense have suggested that the prosecution has no case.
The whole circumstances of evidence gathering through alleged witnesses was one that utterly failed to meet any acceptable standards.
One of the most troubling aspects of this case has been intimidation of witnesses. In the meetings I have held with victims, they very frequently raise this issue. They want to know what it is doing about it, giving its potentially devastating impact on the administration of justice.
For example, one of the most well-known cases is a man who was the spokesperson of the Mungiki group. Now, Mungiki was the group that is allegedly used by Kenyatta to cause mayhem and attack and kill people in Naivasha and Nakuru. So he noticed people who were following him, and he then decided the best thing is to go into a shop, kind of sure that once there are people in the shop, you're safe. These two men came into the shop, shot him, and just walked away. Now, I don't know whether he was a witness for the prosecution, but I know he was a witness in terms of the list of people named who were at a meeting that was planning these atrocities. Anybody who came out as a witness in these cases, both the Ruto case and the Kenyatta case, for me was a very brave person, because you have to be from the community. Why come you not of the victims?
This is a wide scheme to discredit us and our country.
I think our government is more than committed to justice.
On the 3rd of December 2014, the judges of Trial Chamber 5B of the International Criminal Court declined to further adjourn the trial of Mr. Uhuru Kenyatta. Accordingly, given the state of the evidence in this case, I have no alternative but to withdraw charges against Mr. Kenyatta.
Not just in Africa, but even... I want to take you first to one On the Kenya cases, where you said that your responsibility was to prosecute regardless of the status of anybody.
After the elections and they came into power, the case changed a lot, because now we are faced with a situation in which the persons that we have already charged before the judges of the ICC, whose cases have been confirmed before the judges of the ICC, are now the leaders in Kenya. Indeed, we have been able to see that there is a scheme in which several people were involved, and they were going after different witnesses, not just even only in Kenya, but also those who were outside of Kenya.
And what about government cooperation before 2013 election and after? Has there been a difference?
We were confronted with so much attack against the court in terms of interfering with the witnesses, trying to amend the rules. In one instance, they were successful, trying to amend the statute, attacking the ICC at the African Union, unfortunately, and coming up with all sorts of resolutions. Attempts at the United Nations Security Council for deferral, which maybe is their right to do, because, but in the media, attacks in the media, in social media, attempts to expose the witnesses. There were so many attacks against the court, and perhaps has maybe demonstrated that if you are able to do all these things against the case, you can actually succeed in making the case go away, unfortunately. It has gone away for now because of all these difficulties that, that has been made against the case. And for now, impunity reigns, for now.
In Kenya's history, from independence, we have seen assassinations of opposition leaders, assassinations of key people, political infighting leading to assassinations, nothing ever happening. We've seen the state actually have a policy of torture in the Nyayo House torture. We've had a policy of the state massacring people and getting away with it in Wagala, in northern Kenya. A state that has been used to eliminating people and getting away with it doesn't just stop unless something dramatic happens.
It is really a dark day for justice for the victims of these crimes. And I believe that the victims have been denied justice in this situation.
Some of the victims that I've been in touch with epitomize different things to me and to the work I do.
Waliniangusha hapo na wakararua nguo yangu. Mwingine akaanza, huyo mwenye alinifikia kwanza akaanza akamaliza. Tena mwingine akaanza akamaliza. Tena wengine.
Dorothy was evicted from Naivasha after going through horrible gang rape. She was courageous. She was quite open about the rape and about her HIV status, that she was HIV positive. She tried to make a life for herself, was working as a barmaid in certain places in Kisumu, was isolated from her family. They didn't want anything to do with her. She couldn't find a way to fit in. The idea of going back to Naivasha was, I think in Dorothy's mind, was supposed to be therapeutic, to go back and to conquer the demons of Naivasha. Sadly, when she went there, the reaction of the community hadn't changed since 2008. But there was something good out of that neighborhood for her, which is her meeting with Mary. You ni Mary.
Mary. Mimi nilikuwa nafikiria Wakikuyu wanafanyia Wajaluo peke yao. Sikujua kama Wakikuyu pia wameumia. Ndio tumeumia. Hiyo sasa stage yenye niko naye ni kujikasa tu venye sasa imekuwa.
Ingawaje nilikuwa nikiumia mpaka wakati mwingine anasema heri hata mimi ningekufa, lakini hakuna haja, Mungu aliona ana sababu. Nikijaribu hata kujisingiza nitoke, yani niamke na kuwa ni ngumu. Kisha huyo mtoto akachomeka, leso ikachomeka, ikaanguka, yani ikatuachanisha mimi na mtoto. Mtoto akalia, hadi akanyamaza.
One of the things that we have seen from the victims we have been dealing with quite closely is the courage that they exhibit. For Mary, the big thing was she has another baby and calls the baby Mercy. The state paid for the rent of the place they were staying, and there was a bit more care and attention given to them. And then all of a sudden, it stopped. So now what you get is Mary in a really bad situation, calling and contacting anybody she can, anybody she knows, please help. When Dorothy was in hospital, Maurice Anya, who was the lawyer for the victims at the ICC, came to see her and asked her if she was willing to be a witness on the victim side. And Dorothy did not hesitate one bit. She said yes. That, for me, was a very brave thing to say, yes, I do know that I have a duty to tell the whole world about what happened to me so that this can never happen again. Dorothy eventually died in 2011. The only place that we could find to bury Dorothy was in the communal cemetery, which under Luo custom is really waste. But there was no other place to bury her. She was forgotten, abandoned not just by the state, but even by the political elite of Luo Nyanza. Mary, leo umefika Kisumu na ni mara yako ya kwanza.
Kuna rafiki yangu mwenye anaitwa Dorothy aliaga dunia. Mimi ningeomba tu kwa wakubwa wetu, wakati wanatafuta kura hata kama ni nini, wawache kutumia watu ili kupigana sisi wenyewe kwa wenyewe. Ujua wakati ndume mbili wanapong'ang'ana, nyasi ndio huwa inaumia.
And then there is Samari, whose son disappeared during that time of the violence. It's not clear whether he was part or not part of the protesters in Rift Valley, the Kalenjin protesters in the Rift Valley, but he disappeared to film this. Her son disappeared.
Where?
In Kapsoit.
No, that one you cannot do it in the police station. She will report it by herself.
No, I'm going with her because I'm her lawyer. No, listen, sir. Mr. Katogo, please, let me tell you something. Nobody, again, has come to help. Not the Kalenjin political elite, not the state, not anybody. So she's left in a void all alone, wondering, is her son dead? Is he alive? What could have happened? Is he in jail?
And for that 2007.
What is the mood within the victims you represent now at this stage of the process of the International Criminal Court?
After years of promises, the victims are now looking at a situation where there is no reasonable prospect in the foreseeable future of a trial against anyone for the crimes committed on that side of the post-election violence in January 2008.
Kenyatta and Ruto came together and decided that they're going to finish this whole issue of IDPs. So they came up with this solution that they're going to pay every single IDP 410,000 Kenya shillings, which would then enable them to find a little piece of land or build a little shack and be able to start life afresh.
Now, there's absolutely nothing wrong with giving 400,000 shillings to victims, but if it's given to a very small number of victims, it should be given to all victims. In particular, it should be given irrespective of the ethnic group that the victim comes from. It seems to be that many of the victims that did receive the 400,000 shillings are supporters of the President and the Deputy President, and if you come from a group which doesn't happen to support the President or the Deputy President, you won't get your 400,000 shillings.
10,000 The IDPs of the post-election violence have shown tremendous courage in a way that is different from many Kenyans we are seeing. And maybe it's because they are desperate. They have no more choices.
Tuna njia ya kuzungumza na wale wa juu. Tutahakikisha ya kwamba memorandum yenu imeenda.
The way forward for victims, IDP survivors, is them taking the issue, them organizing themselves.
Tunakuja hatuvuji sheria, kwa nini sisi mnatuvujia sheria? Sisi kama wadhiriwa, kwa nini mnatuvujia sheria? Ninauliza.
So it's absolutely essential that we all learn from these IDPs and we start confronting our fear. For crying out loud, if they can stand up and march, then why can't the rest of the country stand up and march peacefully? Oftentimes in society, when peaceful protests do not get what it is that they need, it is very easy for that to transform into something else. Impunity the world over has been the bane of human rights. Human rights is about fighting impunity. Now, we have to ask ourselves, did Kenyatta and his team write the guidebook to impunity? I think they have, within the context. But I take solace in Martin Luther King's words that the arc of history bends towards justice. Ultimately, justice will out.
Welcome everyone for the last session of the World Press Day event here at the NED. I hope you enjoyed this film. My name is Ryota Jonen. I work with the World Movement for Democracy here at the NED. The World Movement for Democracy is, for those of you who don't know about this, the World Movement for Democracy is a global network of democracy activists, human rights defenders, practitioners such as members of parliament who come together to discuss the democratic issues and seek for collaboration. So under the World Movement of Democracy, we've been doing various works using the visual storytelling. We've been producing short stories to share the stories of human rights activists, civil society activists around the world. And actually, in fact, yesterday, we were at the high school in PG County, showing one of the films that we produced, encouraging high school students to talk about what does it mean to be a civil society, how can they engage in the civil society activities. So I'm happy here with Mr. Kiai to share this opportunity to talk about how we're using this visual storytelling to encourage people to think about issues critically. So Ambassador Mark Legon introduced Maina really well, so I'm not going to that too detailed. But Mr. Kiai has been working with us on various issues, especially under the UN Special Rappetour hat that he wears on the issue of expanding the Freedom Assembly and Association. So for National Endowment for Democracy, and I'm happy to facilitate this discussion. So I'm going to throw a couple of questions, and then I'll let you, Maina, answer those questions, and then I'll open up the discussion later with all of you here. So the first question is, what is it that you wanted audience to think about? I noticed that this film, comparing to other films that you produced previously, this film targeted, really international audience, seems like. Last film that you produced was called Unfinished Business, targeting, highlighting the issue of internally displaced people in Kenya. from the 2008 post-election violence. And that was much about how you can help organize IDP people. But this one seems like you have a different message. Can you share your thinking on that?
I'm not sure the message is any different. I think it's just how it's been put together. I think the issue for us is with this film, and you can see it's in English now, but we'll be having it in Kiswahili, so it actually is going to go down into the country and across the country. It's not just for international audiences. But we wanted to make a film that could perhaps explain some things in Kenya, because I think it's important. What we don't want to do is have people get surprised if and when something blows up in Kenya in the future, and then you ask, why did it happen? We never foresaw it. As far as I'm concerned, as long as that election body remains in place, holding on tight, as long as the Supreme Court remains as it is, we have removed a lot of the levers of the peaceful means in which you can address some of the issues that affect Kenya. So it is not. I mean, Kenya is not out of the woods. The fact that we didn't have the kind of violence in 2013 as we did in 2008 doesn't mean that we won't go back. It's not over yet. And the other thing as well we wanted to put out was the issue of impunity. The fact that power gives you a shield, power gives you the methodology and the ability to escape with quite a bit. And that's a question we want. Now, that's not a Kenyan question. It's actually a question across the world, that if you're powerful and if you can hire good lawyers, if you can use the machinery of the state, if you can lobby your fellow presidents to have immunity from charges, then basically you may get away with murder. And I think that is the issue, that even though the case against Kenyatta has been withdrawn, we are very clear he's not been innocent. He's not been declared innocent. It's just that they didn't have the case was withdrawn rather than it being rather than him being found innocent in the charges. So it's really is an issue to put out to the world, to say that please keep an eye on Kenya. It's not over yet. Don't be fooled by the fact that there was a somewhat peaceful election in 2008. And in fact, what we are seeing, if you don't mind if I just go on a little bit, the last 2 weeks or so has seen again now a surge of attacks against civil society. There was a terrorist attack earlier this month in Garissa, Kenya, and in the aftermath of that, we have seen the regime basically listing people, but then they sneak in 2 human rights organizations into that list, and they're being called terrorist supporters. And just yesterday, just this week, then they're now using tax audits as well to attack the same 2 organizations. It is not coincidental. The tax people say it is coincidental, and it's just their plan to do it. But of course, it is not. It's only 2 organizations. They're the ones on the terror list, and they came in, and it's not an audit either, because an audit presupposes that you go into an office, you sit down with the finance people, you look through the books. In this case, they took away hard drives, they took away the servers, they took away documents, and they say they can keep them for 6 months as they conduct their tax audit. They're trying to cripple the organizations. That's really what it is. So we have a position where we are going to see quite a bit of attacks against civil society. In fact, this documentary is really about that. It's about keeping courageous in the face of attacks. And yes, Kenya is not Burundi, it's not Congo, DR Congo, where people are being beaten up and jailed in the same way. But we're off. And so this is really a warning shot to say, just keep your eye on Kenya. It's not yet.
Right, but seems like this president and his friends around in the government seems to be able to get so many different things. The international pressure, the international election observer, the part of the film here it talks about weakness of international electoral observers. And also this film shows how international justice can be easily bullied by some like President Kenyatta. So what is the international community should be doing then?
mean, I think you catch. I think the international community is caught in a tough place because with the terrorism issues around Africa and East Africa and the Horn of Africa, with issues of trade being also important, then I think international community is caught up in a situation where they need to highlight both. The problem is that when it comes to these other interests of trade and security and terrorism, the international community often chooses those way above human rights and democracy and accountability. And it need not be one or the other. It can be both. And you can't have an approach that pushes human rights, democracy, freedoms, as well as pushing those issues of security. For us, the issue on security, especially on the front of the war on terror, is that if you cripple the two organizations in the Kenyan coast that deal with accountability of the state security organs on the war on terror, then you're removing the buffer that's between the state and the people on the coast. And when you remove that buffer, then you're basically telling people there, don't try legitimate means of addressing your issues. Don't go to human rights organizations who will document, who will take things up for you, who will then do advocacy campaigns, who will go to court. You don't need to do that. There's nothing else. If the state is abusing your rights, if the state is killing people willy-nilly, as they do at the coast of Kenya, in the guise of war on terrorism, you're on your own. And what that means then is that people get much more susceptible to extremism and radicalization. It's common sense. So, and that's what is that is a bother with this issue. And we hope that the international community will stand up and tell Kenya and work with Kenya on these issues. That this is not, that the fact that these are critical groups doesn't mean that they're your enemies. In fact, they're probably your best friends because they're keeping people in peaceful means of addressing issues rather than going to extremist, violent ways. So it's something that I think is important. Now, on observation, I think again we just seen a fantastic election in Nigeria, which I think, and Dave Peterson was in Nigeria, and I keep telling him he's the reason that it went well this time rather than before. But it's such a great inspiration to see Nigeria after all these years having a credible election, and that's a great step, and we hope that other countries in Africa will learn from it. National observers, if and when they can just be honest, it's I think sometimes international observers try to play God in a sense, and they feel that if they say it is bad, they will be the reason why there's violence. That's not true. I mean, if it's bad, it's bad. Just say it and let the country deal with it. I mean, the international observers are invited to the country, so just come in and say it as it is. But if they're not going to be honest, if they're going to play politics with us, then might as well stay out and just keep out. We'll sort ourselves out one way. The South Sudanese are trying to sort themselves out one way. May not be the best way, but that's a possibility. If you come in and rather than lying to us and coming to play these political games, just come and be straight up. That's the best thing. It's the best thing.
Well, this is my last question before opening up to everyone. So, the President Obama recently announced in Kenya. Seems like he has a plan to visit Kenya in July. Should he watch this film before he goes? What would be your message to him?
I hope he does. I think he should. I mean, if he's going to shake hands with Uhuru Kenyatta, then he might as well know the real Uhuru Kenyatta. But yeah, I think he should watch it. I think he's coming for what they're calling the Global Entrepreneurship Forum. And of course, that's a meeting with the business community. That's great. He's going to meet with Kenyatta. That is normal. It happens. I hope he also meets with civil society, meets with the critical civil society. He meets with the group Haki Africa and Muhuri and those people who are at risk in Kenya, and has as much time as with Kenyatta. That can be useful to everybody. Actually, that he has time, and of course it is part of his presidential memorandum that he released last year, which he says that the U.S. government must put and elevate civil society. So we'll hold him to account on that memorandum that he himself wrote. We didn't lobby for it. It just came out of his office. The presidential memorandum on standing with civil society. So we hope he has a powerful meeting with civil society. But let me say as well that in that time in Kenya, I hope he also meets critical civil society from the region that exists. He meets people from Ethiopia. We heard about Zone 9 bloggers. He meets people from Burundi, Uganda, from Rwanda, from Tanzania and South Sudan. I think it's a great time for him to meet regional human rights activists so that he can get a better sense of what's going on. I think unlike here in the U.S., a visit by Obama in Africa is always a big thing. I met some people who work for him, and they said they loved being in Jamaica because it's just nice to be treated like a hero in certain parts of the world. So he can rest assured he will be treated with a lot of aplomb and a lot of welcome in Kenya. There's no doubt about that. We hold him as our own. So he's very welcome in that sense. But I hope that he uses that power to also make a message that criticism and dissent is in fact very necessary and very useful.
Okay, now I'd like to invite people to ask questions or make comments. I see a few hands. Let me take me and then gentlemen.
Thank you again, Ryota. Niyakwete. Truth in questioning. Maina and I worked together a long time ago at Trans-Africa, and so it's good to see my old friend back. He teases me about my white hair, and I tell him it's because he's doing such courageous work, and I worry about him. So the white hair is his fault. But Maina, about the president going to Kenya, I was heartbroken when Garissa happened. Not just because of the innocent Kenyans that were killed, but I knew immediately that the U.S. is going to look at it and say, now we have more reason to cooperate because of Somalia. And so I was wondering, the one part that I need help in understanding, what should Kenya be doing with the problem in Somalia? Because it does affect this embrace of a government that may be abusing human rights because it is a security issue.
Thank you. Let me take a few more questions and then...
Hello, my name is Joseph Berhe from Eritrean Press Group. My question is, how do you see the Kenyan election process prior to the election date, prior to the polling stations, the whole journey from registration to the election date? In most African countries, the issue is starting from registration, like the whole year or the whole 6 months prior to the election date. With that case, how you see the Kenyan election journey up to election date? Thank you.
Gentleman over here.
Thank you. Really, it's a good job, and it's a lesson for us as civil society, so that we can make the same actions. I stayed in Kenya for 6 months, and this movie or this film documentary proved for me and pushed me to be convinced that the civil society in Kenya is strong. Is it true? The first question. Second question, if things started with compromise, it will end with compromise. I have a part of Kenyan that the case of ICC in Kenya started picking 3 from this side when Ocampo came to Kenya and picking 3 from this side. So it is just like thing started with compromise and in a political way, something like this, so that it ends with compromise. Thank you.
So
Hi.
Let me take these 3 questions first, and then I'll come to you. Is that okay?
And sort of very good to see you again, Nee. It's always a pleasure to see you. Starting off with your question about the role of Somalia within all these things for Kenya is that, we neighbor Somalia, and we'll always be a neighbor of Somalia. And the reason now the regime in Kenya is talking about doing a wall and a fence between the 700-kilometer plus border with Somalia. I'm sure when that starts, there'll be questions, of course, of where exactly is the border. When you start putting things, then are you sure it's not 1 kilometer in here or there? So it may end up being a huge issue. But I think we're learning from the Americans and trying to put a fence and a wall. Our poorer neighbors, I suppose, is that. But I think it's a bad idea. I think it's a really bad idea. I think, especially in a country as fragile as Kenya, if indeed Kenya does blow up, where will people run to? I think we've got to keep that question always alive. It's not, Kenya is still very fragile, yet we want to act as though we're not. The Somalia question of terrorism is an interesting one, and actually, for a very long time, Al-Shabaab was operating quite happily in Somalia without affecting Kenya at all, and it seemed like there was a unspoken agreement that because the Al-Shabaab, I suppose, would come for rest and recuperation in Kenya to Somalia too. And then at some point when Kenya then invaded Somalia, then that agreement fell to pieces, and now we are under siege as well as much as anybody else. But let's also realize that the threat of terrorism to Kenya is not just Al-Shabaab. And it's not just from Somalia. It's Al-Shabaab, yes, but not from Somalia. They are now the people who were known to have conducted the terror attacks in Garissa were Kenyans. They were not Somalia. They were Kenyans. They were Kenyans not just of Somali origin, but also of other ethnic groups as dark as you are, so it could have been anybody who that is there. So the threat is no longer one at Somalia. We can't just say Somalis who are doing it. It's also Kenyans, because there's been a long recruitment, and part of it is feeding into the sense of marginalization and frustration that many Muslims feel in the country, and the sense that they are the enemy, and there's been recruitment going on as well. So it's not so easy to say that that's the issue. I suppose that we all need this cooperation internationally to deal with a scourge of terror. I mean, you've got to find a way of dealing with it that brings us all in. I think the question for us is how it is done. Because when our security forces go on to it, they always do the wrong thing. It's almost like they choose the wrongest option they can find and implement it. So when Garissa happened, it took our security forces about 10 hours to leave Nairobi to go to Garissa. It's only 4 hours to Garissa, but they were sitting waiting for planes and other things to go, where at that same time the minister has already flown off in a plane to Garissa because he wants to take crack units as are left there. So we don't know, we're not responding well. Something is wrong there. But also then after Westgate Mall happened, then the state went into this community punishment of Somalis. Every Somali was found, was picked up and rounded off and put in at the stadium and kept there for a few days as they were screening to see who's right, who's wrong. That led to a lot within the Somali community, because purely community punishment, which is silly. It's very colonial type of punishment, which is outdated. So there's a lot of stuff we should be doing better to be able to deal with it. But it means, first of all, the state has to be much more transparent and much more accountable for the way it's conducting its investigations and dealing with this threat of terrorism that's on in the country. So, but I think we welcome, and we should welcome, as much cooperation with anybody on this, because this is not just about, innocent Kenyans are dying, innocent Ugandans are going to die. We need as much cooperation on that, because none of us wants to die in this way. I think it's an issue where there is consensus in Kenya that we would like to deal with the scourge of terror and keep people safer, no matter whether you like Kenyatta or you don't like Kenyatta. So if Chinese will help us, let's work with them. If the Tasmanians will help us, we're happy to work with them. It doesn't matter anything on that issue. Now, the other question about the events in Kenya prior to the election, this was the first election under the new constitution of 2010. It's no longer new, but it's the first election. There were 6 elections going on. It was clear that there were things were not going within the election body itself, that they were slow, they were late, they were doing the procurement very late, so then they have to rush, and then you find the cost of something through the rush procurement has jumped up. So there's allegations of corruption that were part of the whole process of the election. I was looking back, even before it happened, was we began to call willful. It was willfully negligent. It was willfully incompetent. It seemed they were basically willfully trying to be incompetent because they wanted a certain outcome. And I think that is one of the things that, if you look back and look ahead before the election, that was very, very clear, was that there was going to be a mess. What we thought then was important was a fact that the presidential election you could then have recourse to the Supreme Court, a brand new court headed by a person who was part of civil society, and so there was a lot of hope in it. I have said this to Chief Justice, and I say it often, that the worst judgment is that they closed off that avenue as a peaceful valve for dealing with election discontent. And the last violence we had in 2008 came out because after the result was announced, the people who were declared the loser said, "Why should we go to court? We know what the answer will be. So let's go and let's go on the streets." And so that's very likely to happen again. So it's very, very dicey in that body, in my view, really just needs to leave and we begin again. And if they don't leave soon enough, we may have the same trouble as we had in 2013 and stuff. Yeah. The last about the civil society. Civil society is generally strong, and I think Dave Peterson, has he gone now? Or Vukasin can answer that better than me, because they come to Kenya all the time and work in civil society. I think it's both strong and weak. I think that's the best answer. I think there are good people and there's some professionals working in the human rights field. It's very strong on service delivery. They're very strong civil society doing service delivery work. I think on the democracy, freedom, human rights, they can be strong, but we get very strong when we're under threat, especially. And then, so other times. On the ICC question about the balance, there's some things we have to take as a fact. One, there was terrible violence in Kenya in 2008. Two, the violence affected both sides, if you wish, of the political divide, by those who are the declared losers attacking those who are perceived to supporting the winner, and then those who are the declared winners attacking those who are perceived to be the losers. So there was a real, in a sense, it was divided, and we know where the theaters of violence happened. To be 3-3 is something else, but clearly, if you're going to do this case right, you needed to have who represented both sides. Maybe it could have been 4-3, 1-3. But actually, to be honest, I keep imagining, because this question has been raised a lot, if Ocampo had decided, okay, that in case one, on the Ruto case, for example, they're going to have 8 people in that case, and on the other side, 2 people, what would be the reaction? If you decide 1-1, what's the reaction? So we can second guess and say yes or no, but clearly there was violence perpetrated by both sides. That is for sure, and violence, but the brutality was intense. Was very, very intense. And so whether it's going to be 3-3, 5-5, 2-1, who knows? But they try to make it those most responsible. Hope I've answered your question.
I know we are pressing the time, but I'd like to take a few more questions. I see hands, the lady with the green jacket, and then lady up here, and then we'll wrap up.
Thank you very much for the film. Very enlightening. And thank you also for your Special Rappetour work on freedom of expression. Really appreciate it. Cece, I'm a media trainer. The film showed that you were able to take your cameras in and do some filming of the election process. How was the coverage, both in Kenya and internationally, about the election and about the ICC process for President Kenyatta? Do you think that they clearly delineated the issues in ways that we can understand it? Because at that point, it seemed that African leaders were being targeted at the ICC. They had the Charles Taylor issue, and then they had the President Kenyatta issue. So, you know, and given what you've just shared with us around the Kenyatta process at the ICC, how then do you mitigate impunity if the system is stacked for those in power? Thank you again.
And then I'll take one more question and then we're up, please.
Thank you very much. I have a question, Maina. Thank you for all the work. We were under the impression at some stage, I'm Fatou from Article 19 Senegal, under the impression that Kenyans in general are not very supportive of the ICC for the obvious political reasons that have been mentioned, that ICC has targeted more African governments, well, leaders than others. And if I know civil society position, but we would like to maybe hear your perspective about the Kenyans like as a country, because we have not also seen a lot of advocacy work at African institution level of Kenyan civil society in support of victims and in support of the ICC process. So I think that also has been maybe one of the missing link of this process. Thank you.
Very briefly, I think let me start off with a question about support for Kenya, about support for the ICC. When the ICC declared it's going to enter and take up the Kenya cases, the polling that was done in support of ICC was 70-80% in support. Absolutely high. People wanted accountability. The moment suspects were mentioned, then you started seeing it going down. Because all of a sudden people are saying, oh, but my kinsman, my tribesman is there, so we can't support it. Why don't they go for this tribesman? So the issue of ICC in Kenya is very tribal, to be honest. It's very tribal. That you find the people who are Kenyatta's tribe will generally not support the ICC. But if you ask them, if you remove Kenyatta, will you support ICC? They support the ICC. So it's really I mean, look, and I think one thing we have to understand is that crimes against humanity, war crimes, genocide are political crimes. So they carry political support or not support. So you can't, it is impossible to say people support or don't support because of politics. If people have political support of somebody, then they will support a process or not. But generally speaking, I think Kenyans would like to see an end to impunity. Now, ICC was what we were hoping would help us do that, and I think the question was asked about what happens next. You know, ICC for me was the first genuine attempt to move away from victor's justice. So you find in almost every single case around genocide, crimes against humanity, war crimes, it's always victor's justice. If you have won, then you can get justice. If you have lost, you don't have. ICC is the first time where they were trying to say it doesn't matter whether you're a victor or a vanquished. If crimes have been committed, let us try and deal with them. That's the first attempt. It hasn't gone very well. And what we're seeing as well is that those who are vanquished, the weaker side, are the ones who are at the ICC, whether it is the rebels in Congo, it is the LRA in Uganda, it is maybe Bemba is the first one who was powerful, but his member is charged for crimes in Central African Republic and not in Congo. So Kenyatta case, the Bashir case and the Kenyatta case was really the first ones where they went for people who are in power, and they haven't gone very, very well. So the question is, yes, the question of the international justice is still out there for us to try and figure out a solution. It's a work in progress. It's not been dealt with properly. I think it's going to be an issue for us all to deal with. So how do we encourage? How do we fight and mitigate impunity? I think we just keep trying to work at it and support in different ways, in as much ways as we can. Now, on the media coverage of the elections, one of the most fascinating things is that it was drummed into the Kenyan media, especially, that before the elections, that they had played a role in the violence of 2008. In fact, some people were trying to tell the media that had they not covered the violence, there wouldn't have been violence. So the media took that very seriously. And sadly, they censored their coverage so significantly. They were so committed to reporting peacefulness. They were so committed to having peace at all costs. Steal the election, do whatever you want, but we must have peace. So they sacrificed accuracy, justice, truth at the altar of calm. I'm not even going to call it peace, because not peace, it was just calm. Peace is something sustainable. What we had is calm. And that was so in fact, what we found before the election and during the election, if you wanted something critical to come out, you went to the international media. You didn't go to the local media. They just didn't do it. And so they played a role in this, and now they're reaping the fruits of it, actually, because they're under attack, and there's so much censorship now within the media, both by themselves and by the state attempting to push them back. So they had a chance, they compromised, and I think they're hurting for it. They're hurting a lot for it, and Kenyatta and his team are trying to just really push them to the end. So that was one of the things. On the International Criminal Court, the media coverage again was fascinating, because Kenyatta and his people managed very effectively to present themselves as the victims, not as perpetrators, but as the victims. So the victims you see in the documentary, the poor people who were chopped off, people who were raped, and people who were burnt, are not in the news. They're not covered. So the whole turnaround and making Kenyatta en route to the victims was very successful, and the media played a part in that. And I think they were lobbied, they were helped, they were paid for, and they did that as well. So to be honest, right now the media in Kenya is not the strongest part of Kenya. It really is a weak media. It's highly compromised, and I think it's not doing well. It's not doing well.
Well, that would be a good end note. As we spent all day talking about world press freedom, the press freedom is important because that's the space where we can raise the voice of the victims of injustice, and that's what Maina is doing through his films. So thank you very much, Maina, for sharing your thoughts and sharing your film. And thank you very much to everyone who spent all day here being with us. Now, I'd like to invite everyone to a networking reception just outside of this conference hall. And Maina's team has T-shirts and baseball caps that he's hoping that he will receive some donation for his work. So thank you very much.
Let me be clear. Actually, yes, I was told about the donations. That the caps, I think, are $15, and the T-shirts are $10. There really is the cost price, but we're trying to. One of the T-shirts say, "I'm an activist and I'm proud of it," and part of it is because over the last few years, there's been a denigration of activists, and you're an activist, you must be rubbish. So we are basically re-owning activism and saying we are proud of it. So we have got those T-shirts out there. Please help us and help the cause of activists. This money goes back into organizing the grassroots people so they can do their protests in Kenya. Thank you.